Ben 36. yılı Uyghur şehirde doğdum. Uyghur şehirde doğdum. 8 yaşta kirge vaxtida mektepke beriyorduk. Mektepte inqilab başlanıp ketdi. 44. yılı mektep itilip ketdi. Şunun bilan 9 yaşım kelgende men mektepke 1. klassga kirdim. 1. klassdan 10. klassga yerda Roşa mektep degan mektebimizde 4. Şungacha bizde Uyghur yaşlarının şunchalik az mezgil bolsa azatlıqni biz kördük. Ahmet Efendi'nin başçılığında şunchalik o'qishga bo'lgan intilishimiz yoshlarning ajoyib bir o'rlash shu vaqt bo'lgan. Her desa Ürümchiga yüzlab o'quvchilar boradi, institutlarda o'qitdi, pedagogik institut, Nim institut, Şinjan instituti mana shularga shundaq ajoyib yoshlardagi intilish shunchalik kuchli bo'lgan. Bara partiyaninki siyosati besim paydo qildi. Besim paydo bo'lishi bilan biz anandikina deb 56 yılga kelgan vaqtda 57 yilda ma'riflar ichida bu vaqtda biz xizmat qilayotgan vaqtimiz ma'riflar ichida birinchi qitim ma'riflarni yig'ib stil tuzash harakatini ifoda. Stil tuzash harakati shu besimning eng kuchli bo'lgan vaqtlari bizga eng qattiq ta'sir qildi. Tunagillikda maktab bitirib hayotga endi ko'z ochgan yoshlarni, yosh muallimlarni o'ngchi, millatchi, sen palanchi vaqtida mundaq degan baldır ashlarni so'ziltib turib, hammani bilib olib, anandan keyin ularni bir chetdan anandan keyin yig'ib taqib qilishga boshladi. Emgak maydonlarga olib muddatsiz ishiltib, turmalarga tashlab, turmalarda muddatsiz turmalarda yotdi. Maşındaq narsalar hammasi anandan keyin bu bizning ko'nglimizga qattiq tegdi bu. Mushuning bilan biz anandan keyin yo'q. Biz Xitoylar bilan biz yashamaydi ekanmiz deb bir qism insonlar angacha 29 may vaqasi men ashada vaqtida Sovetga chiqmagan vaqt. Nima? 29 may vaqasida men emeske ağayla barkarız. Şu sahradan kelgen yaşlar şehrin adamları az. Bir Stalin koçusu degan koçuga patmay qilib kelgen. Sap şehirden nima, yizdin kelgen yaşlar. Şu yaşlarni kechqurun bo'lib namoyish vaqtida anilgan partiya komitetining oldiga kelib namoyish vaqrab nim qilgan vaqtida ashada pulemyot bilan nim qilgan. Etib tashlagan. Qon daryo bo'lib oqqan desi bo'ldi. Qanchalik odam shu nimda o'lib ketdi. Anandaki shu kunlar bular chegarani ichib etdi. Chegarani ichib etib, bizning bolalarimiz G'uljuga ketgan, qayerga ketdi, u bolalarimiz deb hukumatdan so'rab kelganlarga, bolalarimiz chegaradan o'tib ketdi yoqqa. Deb mundaq qistilib qildi. Baldır bilet dedi, o kalayım kançılıklar oldu. Muşu hemmisi G'uljuning içi maşında olup gitti şu mezgilde. Muşu narsalar ko'nglimizga tegib ketgachga biz zodi bu yerda yaşanmaydi ekanmiz deb Sovetga chiqmasak bo'lmaydi ekan. Jondan qutuldirmasak bo'lmaydi ekan balchaqlarimiz. Muşuna o'lib ketdi deb. Anandan keyin mayli voyannilar bo'lsin, voyanni semyalar bo'lsin, mayli grajdanskiy semyalar bo'lsin, hammasi bu narsaga ko'nsilga asta ko'nsil bilan so'zlashib nim qildi. Bizning Sovet pasporti bor edi. Vaqt Sovet Soyuzi bo'ldi. İşten chiqib ketib, yerda ishlab Sovetga ketgicha qora ishlarni ishlab yurdik. Keyin bu Kazakhstanga keldik. Kazakhstanga kelib, cho'nlarning uyiga tushib, yerdan kvartiraga chiqib, vaqtida bolalar yo'q, o'ylanmagan biz ham yosh. Singlim bor, inim bor, dadam bor, opam bor. Dadam bile apam bana meşe kip öldü. Dadam 72 yaşta, apam 90 yaşta öldü. Müştak kılıp, bana Kazakhstan'a kelgenden keyin öylük olduk, semiyelik olduk, balcaklık olduk, ballarımız bana ayağı turdu, iş kılıp yaman gün kömüdük diye ki. Aşağıdaki ahvalimiz, Xitayning besimi asosiy xalqning ketishiga, asosan xalqning ketishiga bo'lgan narsa, bo'lmasa vatanni tashlab ketamdi. Shu narsani men vatanni tark etib o'tdim. Besim kuchli bo'lganligi uchun.
Çoğaltma çıraylı oynatın. Oy молодец. Oy rahmet.
In my view, was good so far in the policy by the political leadership of Kazakhstan is they tried to continue this friendship between all the different ethnic groups and nationalities. And obviously their aim is to keep peace in the country. But this sort of helps to support and promote these different ethnic groups and their cultures and etc. Having said that, you have to remember that the Kazakhstan's political leadership, led by Nazarbayev since the first days of the country's independence, it's sort of very pragmatic in its approach to nationalities question. It is not necessarily that the promotion and support of these various nationalities is done on the sort of humanistic grounds. But when you can see maybe on the example of Uyghur people, of Uyghur community in Kazakhstan, how the attitude of authorities would sometimes change in a way that sometimes they would allow more for their activities, be it registering their political parties or Uyghur organizations, or sometimes allowing them to have their own newspapers. But when the time comes when it doesn't suit the authorities, they wouldn't even think twice to put an end to it.
Аралда biz Uyghurlar Қазақстандыкы яшап аткан казак милләтегә охшаш, башка милләтләргә охшаш ички дәврне көрүп калдык. Совет Итбакы дәврендә умуман азыркы мустакыл Казакстандагы вазият караганда, у дәвр Совет Итбакыдагы дәврдә уйгырларның әхвалы безгә яхшы иде. Ма Совет Итбакы бөлүнүп, Казакстан мустакыллыкка эге болганда, biz уйгырларның үмүдү найт күчлүк болганда, нишка дегенде казак милләтен кайрандаш көрүп өзүбүзгө Казакстан мустакыл болгондан кийин мустакыллыкка эришкенде biz уйгырга худды өзүбүздүн мустакыллыкыбызга эришкенде найт кош болгон. Ама абсус ундак болмады. Вазият там терисиге айланды. Yani Uygurlar işki oturlukta biz kaldık. Vatnimizge qaytып кетемейmiz. Vatnimiz Xitayning astida deb sandırып atkan. Başqa qayga ketimiz. İşki oturlukta qattiq millatchilikning astida kaldık.
There is increased nationalism among Kazakhs in the same way as it is increased nationalism among other groups who are not anymore part of the big Soviet state. So, and obviously this creates or leads to some tension between various ethnic groups. But I don't think it is something which is sort of done from the top. I think the Kazakh government and the Kazakh leadership, they are very keen in keeping the peace and they even say that it is an offense to incite ethnic hatred and etc.
Mesela aşağıdamlarının bir resmi var. Aşir Vahidi Kazakhstan'da, Ni'matullah Basaqov Kırgızistan'da, Emin Osman Özbekistan, Dilberim Samsaqova ayollardan. Mesela şu tört siyasiyonlarımız Uygurların kişilik hukuku için faaliyet ilip verip uçuk, aydın fikirlerini, sözlerini halk sözlegen. Şundaqla Germaniyaga kelip Dünya Uyghur Qurultayının birinci qurultaylarına qatnaşkan adamlar. Bular 1995 bilan 2001-2002 arasida əmsi har xil usul yollar bilan o'lib ketdi.
I can't say there is the ethnic minorities or ethnic groups have less opportunities than during Soviet times. In some areas, yes. For example, in the political decision making, it is mostly Kazakh. If you look at the government, if you look at all the important institutions who make decisions like parliament, you would see that they are predominantly Kazakh, meaning that there are more Kazakh people there. You can argue that there are more Kazakhs living in Kazakhstan than Uyghurs, but if you look at the political representation of ethnic groups, it is, in many cases, it doesn't correspond to their place in the society. For example, Russians are a very good example of that. They are bigger than the Uyghur community, and they play a bigger role in the economy and overall in Kazakhstan. But if you look at how many of them are represented in the important institutions in Kazakhstan, you will struggle to find that they will see that they are not proportionally represented. From that point of view, in the political sphere, yes, I think many ethnic groups are worse off than during Soviet times. Russians being the first clear example. And as you say, some Uyghur feel the same, that before they could go and complain to Moscow, now they have no one to turn to. Most of the things which have been heavily subsidized during Soviet times, Kazakh government is not able to do the same now that it is the market economy. So what, for example, Uyghur community or any other communities or public organizations, as they are called, meaning that they are not, they are supported by the state, but they are not organized by the state, like cultural centers and etc. They look for private funding, obviously, because market economy will put pressure on government subsidies, but it gives rise to the business community, to entrepreneurs who are, in general, are another source of funding or charity, etc.
В Казахстане вообще у нас около 60, не около, вот точно, 63 школы с уйгурским языком обучения. Среди них 14 школ чисто уйгурские школы, остальные 50 это смешанные уйгурская, русская, уйгурская, казахская. Среди этих школ наша школа является гимназией с уйгурским языком обучения. Гимназия в Казахстане уйгурских только одна. Она единственная не только в Казахстане, но и в мире.
Tepesini hep bülekçi ketti yasını aylanın erkisi gelip yenimay yap yeşil baskı ketti pürgünü.
Promoting the culture of ethnic minorities or ethnic communities to preserve peace in the country. The policy is still there, but obviously there are less resources in the government coffers to do that. But this doesn't concern only the cutting funding for Uyghur community or any other ethnic group. It is overall problem for Kazakhstan. So they are not singling out the Uyghur organization that promotes culture and language and giving them less money and leaving other ethnic communities or Kazakh schools with the same. No, I think it is the just because Kazakh government has less money, or if it decides to cut on social funding, obviously these kind of projects will be the first in line.
Анан кийин уйгурлардын арасындагы аз мынча саясий ташкилатлар бар. Бул ташкилатлардын һәммәсе багланып, факатлы мәдәният мәркәз нақш сол ташкилатлар я булмаса өмөкләр калдырылды.
What determines the authorities' attitude to this community is Kazakhstan's relationship to its towards its big neighbor China. And I don't want to go too much into history, but if you if I look at the recent history, at the recent developments between Kazakhstan and China, and if you think about how much cooperation is going on, and particularly on the economic level, because Kazakhstan needs investment for it to develop its oil, for example, which is one of the most important priorities in the economy, because it brings the hard currency into the budget. So, unlike, for example, Western countries, for example, American oil companies or any other European oil companies, the Chinese are much easier to deal with. So therefore, the investment, the value of China as an investor is maybe very high for Kazakhstan, if you talk from that point of view. So therefore, Kazakh government doesn't want to do anything to sort of upset Chinese leadership, to upset its neighbor.
Эң кыйын дәвр аша Шанхай бирлиги киргенден кийин Казакстанда расмий башланды. Немешке дегенде була Кытай белән стратегик партнер, һәм экономия тараптан болсын, сиясий җәһәттән болсын бер көчлек бер ташкилат курылып чыкты. Ягъни сепаратизм каршы, террористларга каршы дип. Әмма буның тегитектеде нургын мәсьәләләр бар. Без уйгырлар рәсми безгә каратылып курылган бер тәшкилат дип билдек.
A couple of years after the independence of Kazakhstan, there was another important issue between Kazakhstan and China, and that was the disputed territories, which were also legacy from the Soviet times. There were patches of territory which were disputed both by Soviet Union in the past and China, and then Kazakhstan inherited these unsolved border disputes. So in order to deal with China, Kazakhstan was also had to be very careful, and and many experts in the region in Kazakhstan, for example, they agree that Uyghur community or Uyghur issue or issue of Uyghur separatism, to put it sort of more exactly, was always used as a trump card by Kazakh leadership or by Kazakh authorities in its dealings with China.
Certainly after independence, Kazakhstan did negotiate with their neighbors, and China being one of them, and there was an extradition agreement between China and Kazakhstan that was signed in the 90s. So, and then later when Kazakhstan joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, that organization also has extradition agreements amongst its members. in particular relating to the fight against the three evils, as they call it, which is terrorism, extremism, and separatism. And that really, has affected one small group, which is, mainly political refugees from Xinjiang.
There is a sort of the overarching idea of promoting Uyghur community and its culture as part of government's overall policy of ethnic peace in Kazakhstan. But at the same time, when there is something to be negotiated with Chinese and Chinese government wants something to be done, the Kazakh government until now they never said no to Chinese.
A Uyghur from Xinjiang most of them will have been trafficked out of the country or will have used the services of a people trafficker to get them out of the country. Certainly the cases we have seen, these are people who've been politically active, who may have been independent journalists or who may have been, local politicians or, possibly some human rights activists, and they won't necessarily know how to make their way across the border illegally, so they kind of all depend on the services of traffickers, which is also one of the reasons why so many of them end up in Kazakhstan, because that's the route that a lot of the people traffickers use. So it's convenient. It's not the safest place for these people, but it's convenient for the traffickers. So once they arrive in Kazakhstan, they've already entered the country illegally, a lot of them. So immediately they're very vulnerable. Then secondly, of course, because of what they've been through in Xinjiang, in many cases, these people will be very suspicious, they will be frightened, they won't necessarily trust, the people they meet. It's going to be very difficult for them to find shelter within the community, the Uyghur community in Kazakhstan, because how can they trust everyone in that community? There are a lot of people who are absolutely not politically active, from Xinjiang, traders, come over regularly. They may have seen wanted posters of, these refugees, so, even the community is not necessarily a very safe place for them. And so their status in Kazakhstan is very dubious.
Xitoy bilan birlashib, hamkorlashib ishlagandan keyin bular Arlaqda G'ulji vaqasi 97dagi G'ulji vaqasidan keyin Qozog'istondagi yashayotgan Uyg'urlarning g'azabini bek qattiq qo'zg'adi bu Shanxay birligi. Nimishqa deganda G'ulji vaqasidan keyin vatandan Sharq Turkistondan nurg'unlagan Uyg'urlar chegara atlab qochib Qozog'istonga kelib panohlik tilagan. Ularni bag'riga qisib yordam qilib ip qilishning o'rniga Qozog'iston prezidenti Nazarbayev Xitoy hukumatiga qaytarib berdi 16 bal. Aşı 16 Uyghur balasını vatan qaytarib berdi. O 16 balın emmisi ölüm cezası bilan o'lib ketdi. Aşı vaqadan keyin Qozog'iston Uyghur xalqi chidayolmay bu zulmga g'azab bilan mushkungacha yashab kelyapti.
If Chinese officials or Chinese government says these people are terrorists because they want to fight for they want to violently overrule the current government in Xinjiang and establish their own state. They are terrorists, they are separatists. This is good enough for Kazakh authorities, and it's, from their point of view, it's good justification to hand them over back to Chinese authorities. There was some kind of, that always been the policy, going back to this bilateral agreement where both sides, both countries, agreed that they will help each other on their own respective territories to fight or prevent any activities that might endanger peace in the neighboring country. So from the Kazakh authorities' point of view, these people are separatists and terrorists. Sometimes they link them to Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, that they somehow work together, or they link them to Al-Qaeda, saying that Al-Qaeda also sponsors them. So therefore, it is, from authorities' point of view, it is very clear who they are.
The problem with a group like the Uyghurs from China, they're extremely vulnerable because they will not be recognized as asylum seekers or refugees in Kazakhstan. So basically, people from the CIS and China will not be recognized by Kazakhstan as refugees. And so the only people who can determine their status is the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. But of course they cannot guarantee international protection in Kazakhstan, so they will have to find a third country that will accept these groups of people. They're mainly people from Uzbekistan, Uyghurs from Xinjiang, Chechens. Those are the main groups that are very vulnerable, and they do not have access to asylum procedures in Kazakhstan at all. What they have now is that they can go to the migration police and they can register with them, which is something that in the past they couldn't do. And so they will then get a document that they can renew. But again, they will have to register with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees before they can go to the migration police to get this document. A lot of them are in a very precarious situation. They come over to Kazakhstan. They really don't want anyone to know their whereabouts. But of course, Kazakhstan won't offer them any protection. They can't, apply for asylum. And really, their only way of getting out of Kazakhstan is by going to the UNHCR and being registered there and being offered resettlement to a third country. But of course, in a way, that's almost like a vicious circle, because once they do apply to UNHCR, then of course they make their presence known. And, they are registered, they are issued with documents, and the Kazakhstani authorities are informed of their presence. Unfortunately, only a very small number of countries that accept, refugees from Central Asia. So that is always causing a lot of problems, because, of course, we feel that Kazakhstan is not safe for this small minority of Uyghurs who have been politically active in Xinjiang. Some of them may have been accused of terrorism in Xinjiang. So, that's really, for them, Kazakhstan is not safe. But then to actually get them out of the country is also extremely difficult. One of the problems we have noticed over the years is the fact that Kazakhstan, if they allow, for example, someone to be resettled out of Kazakhstan to a third country, they will, by allowing that person to leave the country, they will acknowledge that that person has indeed been on their territory, and that they feel that that person is not actually safe on their territory. And, so it's like they're saying to China, in a way, well, actually, we recognize that, you're persecuting these people, it's not safe here because they could be returned to you, so we're allowing them to go, and that's not something that the Kazakhstani authorities are willing to do openly.
Немножко дегенде bizim Uygurlar Kazaklarga o'xshash, O'zbek millatiga o'xshash, Sentral Aziyadagi 5 davlatga o'xshash bizmi Xudoyim buyursa bir necha yillardan keyin Uyg'uriston bo'lib Xitoyning qulidan, zulmidan qutulib mushlarga o'xshash bir mamlakat bo'lib mushlarga 6-chi davlat bo'lib qo'shilamiz deb umidlangan. Masalan, bizning ota-onalarimiz 61-yilgi siyosat bilan ko'chgan bo'lsa, biz ikkinchi immigrationlarni ikkinchi avlod Yevropa taraf boshqa mamlakatlarga qarab ko'chdik.
Odamlar bizlar bog' odamlar bilan mundaqliqi ko'ngil sir etishib, ancha gaplashib ketmaydi ekan. Odamlar naydan yuragi mo'jilgan mening qarashimcha. Mushu 50 yil partiya kelgandan tortib mush vaqtcha bir qancha qitim siyosiy harakatlar oqidan bu to'yvagashga xalqning yuragi bek mo'jilib ketibdi. Qo'rqanchoq bo'lib ketgan. 3 odam bir yerda o'tirib o'zaro o'zining sirdishini sir etamaydi ekan. Masalan, biz qolgan gaplarimizni bir og'aylarimiz bilan yoki tanishlarimiz bilan o'tasak, любой temada biz gap qila olamiz. Ularda anda söz erkinligi yo'q. Qo'rqdi, cho'chiydi. Tuqqanlarni bundoq sinab baktım. Zaten hükümet doğruluk gap qilmaslik, og'izni chim jumbilish. Mushu narsa kuchlik. Unda bo'lgani shu har bir siyosiy harakatlarda odamlarni ochiq jazolaydiganlarni ochiq jazolar. Xalqning ko'zicha 20 fevral vaqasini mana anladik. Yüzlab yaşlarımızda, minglab yaşlarımızda qishning kuni suv to'ng'itib o'ltaverdi. Ashlarni ko'rgandan keyin xalq degan hukumatga qarshi gap qilamdi. Gap qilmaydi albatta. Shuna qilib yuraklar mo'jil bo'lgan ular. Yaxshilik tarafdan o'zgarish yo'q. To'ki odamning ko'ngli buzilgan ahvol. İşsiz, yezlarda balla işsiz. O'zi kechgacha otabda o'tagan ish yo'q. Kambag'alchilik qashshoqlik bo'lib ketgan. Xitoylarni qarasangiz, Xitoylar hukumat uylarida o'tirayotgan Xitoylarga luboyat ish bor. Uyg'urlarga ish yo'q. Ahval intayin ig'ir. Biz Uyghur xalqının sanatçı xalq biz. Toy to'kinlarimizni qanday o'tkazamiz? Mana mashadada to'ylarda bo'g'im, hammalar bo'lsa, nayt erkin, shadiyani shunda ko'ngilli o'tdi to'ylar. Men Xitoydagi bir tuqunimning to'yiga qatnashib qoldim, to'g'ri kelib qoldi. Kalla padadan qaytgandan keyin kallarni seg'ib etib, anandan keyin to'yga bordi ekan. Bir qozon polonni qildi ekan, qarab. Endi bizdagi burunqi san'at degan narsalar burundan ashalardim shundoq san'atchilar chiqdi. Sayralardim. Ajoyib naqshchi odamlarimiz bor edi.